Today we're going to talk about making compost, which I have to admit is one of my favourite things, not only to talk about, but also to do. I am totally obsessed with hoarding nutrients on this farm. So anything that comes out of the kitchens, or the farm, or my garden, the lawn clippings, the fallen leaves, everything, I turn into some form of compost to feed back to the soil. I've talked before about how to grow healthy plants in containers in the easiest way, and that is to try and get healthy soil life in your pots. And to get lots of soil life, you need to feed the soil organisms, and you feed them compost or organic matter. And it's great if it's broken down into nice, well-rotted compost, because then you don't get issues with slugs and weird smells and other stuff. So I'm going to talk about what the most important things to think about are when you're making compost. When you're chatting to obsessed people like me, there is a lot to say about compost. There are many things to think about: green materials versus brown materials, nitrogen levels, carbon levels, surface area, volume, all these things. But I'm going to tell you to concentrate on just one thing. I promise you that if you think about one thing, you will make good compost. And that thing is moisture levels. You have to think about the water content of your compost. Get it too dry and nothing will happen. Your compost just won't decompose. Get it too wet, lots will happen, but it'll be smelly and waterlogged and horrible. If you get the moisture level right, which is about 70% moisture, which is a totally useless fact, but the way I like to think of it is take a bit of your compost and squeeze it out as much as you can. And if you can get drips of water out of it, it's too wet. If there's no chance of getting any water out of it at all, it's too dry. And if it's just wet, that's perfect. So it's like the moisture content of a wrung out sponge. Grass clippings, kitchen waste, like all like green vegetable stuff is too wet. That's up at like 90% water. So if you're using lots of that, you have to add in something dry, like ripped up newspaper or cardboard or dry leaves or dry twigs. And I promise you, if you think about the moisture level, get it right, then you will make good compost. But you may now be wondering what you're going to make your compost in. And there are lots and lots of different choices available. Behind me, you'll see some very large corrugated tin compost heaps, possibly too large for a Belfast alleyway. You also get the plastic Dalek ones with a lid and a little hatch. They're widely available. We have one over there. But I'm going to suggest that the ideal thing for an alleyway or a small garden is something like this. So it's a bit like the Dalek, but it's smaller and it's wooden. It doesn't have to be wooden, but it's easy to make stuff out of wood. And the reason it's better than a Dalek is it's much smaller. If you just have a small garden, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to fill one of those big things. Whereas this, you can make it as small as you want. Like, it can be tiny. And what you'll find is as you add in your weeds or your bits of vegetables or your kitchen waste, it'll just disappear and disappear and disappear. So even if you almost fill it up every time you put stuff in it, when you come back, it will have rotted down and it will be empty. Or not empty, but it'll have space in it. I recommend getting some sort of cover. So I've just got an old piece of carpet that I shove on here. And that is because I want to control moisture levels. If you keep it on when it's dry and sunny outside, you'll be retaining moisture in there. And if you take it off when it's raining, you'll get extra moisture in there. So you can take it off and on depending on the moisture levels and the weather conditions. If you want the simplest way to make compost of all, get yourself one of these, sort of suitably sized for your garden. So small if you have a tiny alleyway and small garden. And then just put stuff in it, willy-nilly, but correct moisture content. And then in the winter time, basically lift up your compost heap, put it next door to your compost. And then this is freshly made. But what you'll find is nice, rich, dark compost at the bottom and then uncomposted stuff at the top. So I recommend you then take the uncomposted stuff, shove it back in your compost heap, ready for next year's composting. And then the good stuff, the dark brown stuff, mulch your beds, mulch your pots, mulch wherever you've got, use it up. And that way, each year, you're recycling the nutrients back into your soil, feeding the soil organisms that will then feed your plants, which can then feed you. And just to add, the best place to put your compost bin is on top of some soil, whether it's on the ground or whether it's in a large container. If you stick your compost bin on the soil, the composting process has contact with soil organisms and you will get more lively composting action. It'll also allow it to drain out, and whatever surface you've got it on will become beautifully weed-free and fertile as well. So you can move it around each year if you so desire. And just to say, if you've got the plastic garlic compost bins, it's totally grand to do this same method. So lifting off the plastic, it's what I do with my garlic. Lift off the plastic, move it to the side, and then throw the stuff in and use the compost. They have little hatches at the bottom, but it's so hard to get the compost out, it never really works. So the lifting off technique is definitely recommended. An alternative to making compost is to make compost teas. Well, rather than turning it into lovely rich brown compost, you basically ferment the leaves down in water and use that as a liquid feed for your plants. So I'm going to go and show you some of the compost tea that I made earlier. This is very, very, very smelly. So this is some compost tea that I've made out of nettles, basically. So nettles, they're very rich in nutrients, but you could kind of do this with anything that you wanted to kind of ferment down and extract the nutrients from. So you can either do it dry, where you put a whole load of leaves in a watertight container and like put a stone on them. And because they're so moist, you know, fresh green leaves, they'll just kind of rot away into a kind of black brown smush, like it's horrible and it smells really bad. And you can then use that diluted in a watering can to water over your plants. This is wetter. It's got a little bit of water in it. But you do the same thing. I have actually a tap on this thing, but I wouldn't bother using it. It would just instantly get clogged up. So when I want to use this, I just get a wee cup and take out a little bit of the liquid, throw it into my watering can, and there you go, homemade liquid feed for your plants.